Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into a massive, breaking development in the global fight against infectious diseases. Look, two absolute titans of global health have just joined forces, and they're aiming to take down one of humanity's oldest and deadliest foes, tuberculosis. Millions. That's the startling number of people who still contract TB every single year. Right now, today, it is still one of the top infectious killers on the planet, sitting right up there with COVID-19 and HIV/AIDS. Every year, millions fall ill, and tragically, well over 1 million people lose their lives to it. Honestly, it's a staggering human toll for a disease that so many people, especially in developed nations, just assume was wiped out decades ago. So that brings us to what might be the most baffling part of this whole situation, right? If TB is curable, and we do have antibiotics for it, why on earth is it still a global crisis? Why are millions still getting sick? Well, it really comes down to just how incredibly difficult modern prevention and treatment actually are. The antibiotic regimen to cure TB, it's brutal. You're talking about months, sometimes up to a full year, of taking a handful of really harsh pills every single day. And because it is so incredibly hard to actually finish that treatment, we're seeing this terrifying rise in drug-resistant TB. Basically, the bacteria are outsmarting our medicines. That means we can't just rely on trying to cure it after the fact. We have to prevent it in the first place. But as you'll see, figuring out modern preventative measures for TB is literally one of the hardest puzzles in all of medical science. Let's get into Section 1, the global TB crisis. You know, TB is truly a 19th century disease that is posing a massive 21st century threat. It just continues to devastate communities all over the world, especially in low and middle income countries. It thrives in crowded conditions, and it really preys on those who already have weakened immune systems. And the toll here, both economic and human, is just astronomical. Entire families get pushed into poverty because the main breadwinner gets sick and has to isolate for months on end. On top of that, whole health systems are completely overwhelmed by the insane costs of treating these new drug-resistant strains. So this isn't just a medical issue, guys. It's a massive socioeconomic anchor dragging down entire regions. The sheer scale of the problem means that tiny incremental steps just aren't going to cut it anymore. We absolutely need a massive, sweeping solution. Which leads us to Section 2, a heavyweight health alliance. Okay, let's meet the heroes of our story. First up in this groundbreaking partnership, we have the Serum Institute of India. By volume, they are literally the world's largest vaccine manufacturer. And honestly, that perfectly illustrates the sheer scale we are talking about here. The Serum Institute doesn't just make, a few thousand doses of a medicine in a boutique lab. They make billions. They have this completely unmatched manufacturing power to pump out life-saving solutions at a truly global scale. And just as importantly, they do it at a price point that makes these vaccines actually accessible to the developing world. When they commit to making a vaccine, it means that if the science checks out, the physical medicine will actually make it to the most remote corners of the globe that need it most. Now let's look at the other half of this powerhouse duo, the Gates Medical Research Institute, or Gates MRI. So they operate as a nonprofit biotech organization, which is a really fascinating model. Basically, they run exactly like a high-tech, cutting-edge biotechnology firm, packed with absolute top-tier scientists and researchers. But their bottom line? It isn't profit. Their bottom line is global health equity. They are 100% dedicated to research, innovation, and development for diseases that disproportionately hit the world's poorest populations. We're talking about diseases exactly like TB, which, let's be honest, traditional pharmaceutical companies might not always see as wildly profitable. So what does this all mean? It means we're seeing massive manufacturing power finally meeting elite research innovation. This specific alliance perfectly bridges what the medical world often calls the valley of death. See, it happens all the time. A brilliant new drug gets invented in a lab, but it just dies there. It never reaches the public because figuring out how to mass produce it is just too expensive or too risky. But by pairing the incredible, nonprofit research brilliance of the Gates MRI with the absolute industrial muscle of the Serum Institute, they're completely bypassing that valley. They are ensuring that if this new experimental vaccine actually works, the pipeline to get it into the arms of millions of people is already built, primed, and ready to go. All right, let's dive into the science in Section 3, the experimental vaccine. To really grasp what's happening here, we need to compare this century-old BCG vaccine with this brand new experimental one. Now, you might be wondering, wait a second, don't we already have a TB vaccine? And you're right, we absolutely do. It's called BCG.
But here's the catch. The BCG vaccine was developed over 100 years ago, literally a full century. Now, don't get me wrong, it has saved countless lives, but it is fundamentally operating on 1920s medical technology. So to really understand why this new experimental drug from Gates MRI and the Serum Institute is such a necessary breakthrough, we have to look closely at what the old BCG vaccine can do, and more importantly, what it absolutely cannot do. And here is the absolute core of the medical dilemma. BCG mostly protects infants. It does a fantastic job of preventing severe forms of TB in early childhood. But as those kids grow up, that protection, it completely fades away. That is exactly why this new experimental vaccine is a total game changer. It aims to protect adolescents and adults. Why is that a big deal? Because teenagers and adults are the ones who actually get pulmonary TB. That's TB in the lungs. They're the ones coughing on crowded buses, in busy factories, and in tightly packed homes. They are the primary spreaders. Think about it. If you really want to stop a global TB crisis, you can't just protect babies. You have to break the transmission chain, and that is exactly the demographic this new vaccine is going after. Which brings us to Section 4. What happens next? Now, as thrilling as this whole alliance is, we do need to manage our expectations just a bit. The word experimental is the key word here, meaning there is still a very rigorous and honestly quite suspenseful journey ahead to turn this lab research into a scalable reality. First up, clinical trials. They have to prove in massive, real-world human trials that this vaccine is safe and highly effective at stopping TB in adults. If that works, next up is the monumental task of overcoming regulatory hurdles. Every single health agency, from the FDA to the WHO, has to rigorously scrutinize the data. Assuming they get the green light, then comes mass manufacturing. This is where the Serum Institute flips the switch, turning out hundreds of millions of perfect, sterile doses. And finally, the massive logistical nightmare of global distribution. We're talking cold chain storage and incredibly complex logistics to get these vials everywhere, from remote mountain villages to bustling megacities. It is a massive, multi-year pipeline. All of this leaves us with one final, truly provocative question. Could this partnership finally make TB a disease of the past? I mean, for the first time in a century, we have the cutting-edge research innovation of organizations like the Gates MRI directly hardwired to the unmatched manufacturing superpower of the Serum Institute of India. It's an alliance custom-built to take down a Goliath. Now, it's certainly not going to happen overnight, but the pieces are finally on the board to potentially eradicate one of humanity's oldest and most stubborn killers. Keep your eyes on this developing story, because if they pull this off, it will absolutely be one of the greatest medical triumphs of our lifetime. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.